Hello guys, welcome back to Boring Historian. Tonight we are pushing aside the heavy, dusty curtain of traditional history. The kind that speaks only of kings and knights in shining armor. We are venturing into the mud and the smoke of a medieval military campaign. But we are looking for the people who are always there, yet almost never seen. Imagine the great clatter of 1,000 men preparing for battle, the ringing of hammers on anvils, the shouts of commanders. Now, listen closer. Beneath that noise, you can hear another set of sounds. The chatter of women washing clothes in a cold stream, the sizzle of food in 100 cooking pots, the quiet hum of a needle mending a torn tunic. What you're about to hear might stick with you. It will almost certainly change the way you see every medieval battle scene forever. If you're picking up what I'm putting down, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. It's always a thrill to see where you're all listening from. So please share your city and your local time in the comments below. All right, find your quiet space, let the outside world fade, and let's begin our journey. You are not a damsel in a tower, waiting to be rescued. You are not a queen on a throne, dispatching armies with a wave of your hand. You are an ordinary woman, and you are at war. But you do not carry a sword or a shield. Your place is in the vast, slow-moving, and absolutely essential tale that follows every medieval army. The baggage train. You have joined this sprawling, chaotic procession for any number of reasons. Perhaps your husband is a man-at-arms in the Lord's retinue, and to be without him is to be without protection or income. Perhaps you are a widow, and the army is the only place a single woman can find work in a relative degree of safety. Or perhaps you are simply an entrepreneur, and you see the army for what it is: a massive, mobile city of thousands of men with wages to spend and a desperate need for services. When the army makes camp, it is not a neat collection of soldiers' tents. It is a city, and it explodes into life. It's a chaotic, sprawling metropolis of canvas, wood, and smoke. The sounds are a symphony of human effort. The whinnying of thousands of horses, the lowing of cattle driven along for food, the shouts of merchants hawking their wares, the hammering of armorers and farriers, the drunken singing from makeshift taverns, and woven through it all, making it all possible, is the work of women. You are part of a vast, unofficial, and largely invisible workforce, the women who were known, often dismissively, as the camp followers. The simple truth is that a medieval army cannot function on its own. A soldier who spends all day marching or fighting cannot then be expected to forage for his own firewood, cook his own meal, mend his torn clothing, and sharpen his own weapons. The logistical and domestic labor required to keep an army in the field is immense, and that labor falls almost entirely to the community of the baggage train. And a huge portion of that community is you and your fellow women. Let's imagine your role. Perhaps you are a laundress, a lavendera. Your days are spent on your knees by the nearest stream, regardless of the weather. Your hands are perpetually raw and red from the cold water and the harsh, caustic soap made from lye and animal fat. You wash the soldiers' linen undergarments, their woolen tunics, their blood-stained bandages. It is grueling, back-breaking work, but it is also utterly essential. In a crowded, unsanitary camp where disease can spread like wildfire, clean clothing is a matter of basic hygiene and health. For the soldier, receiving a clean shirt is a small but powerful boost to his morale, a reminder of comfort and civilization in a world of mud and violence. You are not just washing clothes. You are fighting a constant battle against filth and despair. Or perhaps you are a cook. You might have your own small cart, your own pots and pans. Over an open fire you prepare food. You might have a great cauldron of pottage, that thick, hearty stew of grains, and whatever vegetables you could forage or buy, selling it by the bowlful to soldiers who don't belong to a specific household. You might bake small, savory pies or pasties that a man can carry with him on the march. You are a small business owner, a restaurateur in this temporary city of war. You provide the hot meal that gives a man the strength to face another day of marching, another terrifying battle. Your work is endless and varied. You are the one who gathers firewood from the surrounding woods. You are the one who forages for wild herbs, greens, and mushrooms to supplement the monotonous army rations. You are the one who sits by the firelight late into the night, your needle flashing as you mend a tear in a leather jerkin or sew a new lining into a helmet. You are the one who helps set up the tents when the army makes camp, and who does the hard work of packing everything up again when it's time to move on. You are the domestic engine that makes the entire military machine run. Within this sprawling, chaotic community, there is, of course, a social hierarchy. If you are the wife of a knight or a wealthy man-at-arms, you hold a higher status. You might have your own tent, your own servants, and your duties might be confined to managing your own noble household. If you are the wife of a common archer or foot soldier, your position is more humble. You live and work among the other common families, your existence tied directly to your husband's. And then there are the unattached women, the widows, and the single entrepreneurs who are there on their own terms. Their presence in the camp, a matter of pure economic reality. But who were most of these women who followed the drum? Were they respectable wives and daughters? Or were they, as many contemporary chroniclers suggest, a disreputable rabble of prostitutes and thieves? This is a point that historians still actively argue about. What was the true status of the average camp follower? One view, a more traditional one, leans on the chronicles written by monks and priests, who often looked upon the baggage train with disdain. They described the camp followers as a source of sin and disorder, a corrupting influence on the fighting men. In this view, the camp was followed primarily by a horde of prostitutes, ale sellers, and other women of ill repute, drawn by the promise of easy money from lonely, undisciplined soldiers. A more recent school of thought, however, challenges this picture. By looking at administrative records like payrolls and supply lists, historians now argue that a very large percentage of the women in the camp were, in fact, the legitimate wives and family members of the soldiers. The army was their community. Their husband's wage was the family income, and following him on campaign was the only way to keep the family unit together. They were not there for immoral purposes. They were there because the army was their life. The truth, as is so often the case, lies in a messy combination of the two. The lines were incredibly blurry. A woman might be the legitimate wife of a soldier, but to supplement his meager pay, she might also take in laundry from other men in his company. She might also sell the extra ale she brewed. And she might, on occasion, offer companionship for a price to a man whose wife was not with him. Survival in the baggage train required pragmatism and a flexible approach to generating income. The camp was a complex economy where domestic, commercial, and sexual services were all intertwined. The official attitude of the army's commanders towards you and the other women was deeply ambivalent. On one hand, they knew you were essential. On the other, they saw you as a problem. You and the rest of the baggage train, the carts, the children, the animals slowed the army down. You consumed precious resources of food and water, and you were seen as a distraction, a temptation that could lead the soldiers into drinking, gambling, and brawling, undermining the strict discipline required for a fighting force. Because of this, it was a common practice for a commander to issue an order to expel all unnecessary or useless women from the camp. This would happen periodically, especially right before a major battle, or when the army needed to make a quick march. The chronicles are full of these theatrical purges. You might be rounded up with hundreds of other women and ordered, on pain of punishment, to leave the camp immediately. The terms used for you in these orders were often deeply derogatory. The word lavandera, laundress, could be a simple job description, but it was also often used as a catch-all, dismissive euphemism for any woman in the camp who was not a noble lady, with the strong implication that she was also a prostitute. But these purges were almost always a temporary piece of political theater. The commanders knew that if they actually got rid of you permanently, the army would grind to a halt. The soldiers' morale would plummet without the services you provided. Who would cook their food, wash their clothes, mend their shoes? The soldiers would become sick, mutinous, and miserable. And so, a few days after being dramatically expelled, you and the other women would quietly be allowed to filter back into the camp. You were a necessary evil, officially condemned but unofficially indispensable. A wry observer might say that the army's relationship status with its camp followers was always, it's complicated. Life in this mobile city was one of constant precarity. You were intensely vulnerable. Disease was perhaps the greatest threat. The sanitary conditions in a medieval military camp were appalling, with thousands of men and animals living in close quarters, with waste disposal being rudimentary at best. Outbreaks of things like dysentery, bloody flux, were common and deadly. You were also vulnerable to the violence of the army itself. While you might be under the protection of a husband or a captain, the camp was a rough place, full of hard men, and the risk of assault was always present. And your greatest fear was battle. When the army marched out to fight, you were left behind with the baggage. If your side was victorious, you would share in the celebration and the spoils. But if the army was defeated, or if it was forced to make a sudden, panicked retreat, you were in the most dangerous position of all. The baggage train was slow, cumbersome, and the first thing to be abandoned in a rout. Your chances of being captured by the enemy, killed in the chaotic aftermath, or simply left behind in hostile territory were terrifyingly high. You finish wringing out the last of the bloody linen shirts, your back aching with a familiar fire, and your hands raw and wrinkled from the lie. You look up and see the sprawling, smoky city of tents that is your temporary home. The sun is setting, and the smoke from 1,000 cook fires turns the evening sky a hazy orange. You are not a warrior. You do not have a glorious story that will be told by the chroniclers, but you are at war. Your life is one of relentless labor, constant movement, and bone-deep weariness. You are a vital cog in the great, unrecorded engine that allows a medieval army to function. Your work, so often dismissed and made invisible by history, is as essential to the success of this campaign as the knight's lance and the archer's longbow. And while your thankless labor is focused on mending the physical needs of the healthy soldiers, their clothes, their food, their shelter, another group of women in this very same camp is tasked with a much more urgent, desperate, and compassionate kind of mending, tending to the broken, bleeding, and dying bodies of the wounded. While your labor mends the physical needs of the healthy soldiers, their clothes, their food, their shelter, another group of women in this very same camp is tasked with a much more urgent, desperate, and compassionate kind of mend. They are the menders of men, the healers and nurses who work tirelessly to piece together the broken bodies that are the inevitable product of medieval warfare. The battle is over. The triumphant shouts have faded, replaced by the low, steady groaning of the wounded. The cost of victory now begins to roll back into camp, carried on rough carts and makeshift litters. This is the grim harvest of war. You see men with gaping cuts from swords and axes, with limbs shattered by mace blows, and with the deep, piercing wounds of arrows and crossbow bolts. In a modern army, a formal medical corps would spring into action with field hospitals, sterile equipment, and trained medics. In your world, no such thing exists. The army might have a single university-trained physician, a man of great learning who serves the king or the duke himself. There might be a handful of barber surgeons, craftsmen who know how to set a bone or stitch a wound, who also cater to the high nobility. But for the common foot soldier, the archer, the man-at-arms, there is no official medical system. His care, his comfort, and his very survival now depend almost entirely on the women of the camp. You are one of these women. You are a healer. You have no formal title. You have not studied the ancient texts of Galen in Latin. Your knowledge has been passed down to you from your mother, and from her mother before her. It is a practical, earth-bound wisdom, a deep and intimate understanding of the herbs and plants that grow in the fields and hedgerows. Your medical kit is not a surgeon's roll of gleaming steel instruments. It is a simple cloth pouch, fragrant with the scent of dried leaves, roots, and flowers. A man is brought to you, his leg laid open by an axe blow. You know that the first and most important thing is to clean the wound. You have no chemical antiseptics, but you do have wine and vinegar. You wash the wound carefully with wine-soaked cloths, the alcohol acting as a crude but effective cleansing agent, stinging terribly, but helping to prevent putrefaction. You inspect the wound for any foreign objects, a splinter of wood, a scrap of cloth, and carefully pick them out. If the bleeding is severe, you might reach into your pouch for dried yarrow, a plant known for its ability to help staunch the flow of blood, packing it into the wound. Then you take your simple needle and a strong linen thread and begin the rough work of stitching the flesh back together. Your pharmacy is the natural world. You know that the bark of the willow tree, when chewed or brewed into a tea, can ease a fever and dull a throbbing pain. You don't know that it contains a chemical called salicin, the natural forerunner of modern aspirin. But you know that it works. You know that a poultice made from the crushed leaves and roots of the comfrey plant, sometimes called knitbone, can help soothe the pain of a fracture and seems to speed its healing. You see a man with a festering infected wound, and you know what to do. You create a poultice from a piece of old moldy bread. This seems like superstitious nonsense, but what you are unknowingly doing is harnessing the power of the penicillium mold, the natural source of penicillin, one of the most powerful antibiotics ever discovered. You are practicing cutting-edge medicine without any of the science. A wry observer centuries later might note that you had discovered the cure, but tragically failed to patent it. Some of your other remedies are just as effective and just as strange. You might press a thick, sticky mat of cobwebs directly onto a bleeding wound. The fine threads of the web create a natural mesh that helps the blood to clot. And modern science has shown that cobwebs often contain mild antiseptic and antifungal properties. You might gather sphagnum moss from a nearby bog to use as a wound dressing. It is incredibly absorbent, far more so than linen. And it also has natural antiseptic qualities due to its acidity. You are, in essence, creating sterile, disposable field dressings from the landscape around you. And for dressing burns or open wounds, you would use honey. You know it keeps the wound clean and seems to help it heal faster. You don't know that its high sugar concentration creates an environment hostile to bacteria, and that it contains natural antibacterial agents like hydrogen peroxide. You just know, from generations of experience, that it is good medicine. So where does your practical, hands-on, herbal knowledge fit in with the formal, learned medicine of the male professionals in the camp? What was the relationship between a woman like you and the university-trained physician? This is a fascinating question that historians still argue about. Did the educated physicians dismiss your work as ignorant superstition? Or was there a level of quiet, unacknowledged cooperation on the ground? The physician's world was one of theory. He would stand at a distance from a wounded nobleman, perhaps examining his urine or consulting an astrological chart. He would diagnose the patient's condition based on the ancient theory of the four humors. He might declare that a fever was caused by an excess of hot blood, and therefore the correct treatment was to bleed the patient, to open a vein, and drain some of this excess humor away. He was not a craftsman. He would never deign to touch the patient himself. He was an intellectual, a diagnostician. The surgeon was the craftsman. He dealt with the physical reality of the wound. He would be the one to perform the bloodletting prescribed by the physician. He would set a broken bone, stitch a major wound, or, in the most dire circumstances, perform an amputation. This was a brutal, terrifying procedure, done without anesthetic and with a very low chance of survival. The surgeon's tools were saws, knives, and cauterizing irons. From the perspective of the university-trained physician, your herbal remedies and practical skills were likely seen as little more than peasant folklore. Your knowledge didn't come from the authoritative Latin texts, so it could not be true medicine. You were an uneducated woman, practicing a kind of folk magic that had no place in his scientific worldview. However, in the bloody, chaotic aftermath of a battle, pragmatism may have often won out over theory. The physician and the handful of surgeons were busy attending to the high-value noblemen. They had neither the time nor the inclination to deal with the hundreds of wounded common soldiers. That task fell to you, and a wise physician, seeing that your poultices seemed to reduce swelling, and your teas seemed to ease fevers, might have adopted a policy of benign neglect, or even quiet encouragement. There might have been an unofficial division of labor. The men of science would tend to the lords, using their theories and their books, while the women of the camp would tend to the masses, using their practical skills and their inherited herbal wisdom. Your role as a healer, however, extended far beyond the immediate casualties of battle. You were, in effect, the camp's general practitioner. The greatest killer on any medieval military campaign was not the sword, but disease. You spent most of your time dealing with the mundane, miserable, and often deadly illnesses that swept through the crowded camp. You brewed teas to soothe coughs and potions to stop the dreaded dysentery, the bloody flux, which could kill more men than any enemy army. You were also the camp's midwife. Life and death existed side by side in the baggage train. Babies were conceived and born on the march, and the knowledge of childbirth was exclusively in the hands of women. When a woman went into labor, it was you and your fellow women who would create a private space for her, who would coach her through the delivery, and who would use your herbal knowledge to ease the pain and handle any complications. You were bringing new life into this world of death, but you must also live with the constant crushing reality of your limitations. You have no knowledge of germ theory. You fight against infection with honey and mold, but it is a battle you lose as often as you win. For every man whose wound you stitch cleanly, another dies in agony days later from gangrene or sepsis. Your role, so often, is not to cure, but to comfort. You are the one who gives a dying man a sip of water. You are the one who places a cool, damp cloth on his fevered head. You are the one who holds his hand and perhaps whispers a prayer as he passes. You are providing palliative care in a world that has no name for it, offering a small measure of compassion in the face of immense suffering. You rise from your knees, your back aching and your clothes stained with blood and herbal potions. You have done all you can. Some of the men you treated today will live, many will not. You look out over the camp, a sprawling city of exhausted, wounded, and grieving people. You are not a commander. You are not a knight. You are not a chronicler who will write the history of this war. You are simply a woman with skilled hands and a deep, practical knowledge of the healing power of the earth. You are the unseen, unrecorded, and utterly essential medical system of this army. And while you are here on the front lines, tending to the brutal physical defense of the body, a noble lady in a castle hundreds of miles away might be called upon to mount a very different, but no less desperate, kind of defense. The defense of her home, her lands, and her people against the onslaught of a besieging enemy. While you are here on the front lines, tending to the brutal physical defense of the body, a noble lady in a castle hundreds of miles away might be called upon to mount a very different, but no less desperate, kind of defense. The defense of her home, her lands, and her people against the onslaught of a besieging enemy. The world of medieval warfare was not just confined to the chaotic, muddy camp and the bloody battlefield. It was also a world of sieges, of long, grueling struggles where the home itself became the front line. And on that front line, the commander was often a woman. Imagine now that your reality is no longer the rough communal life of the baggage train. You are a high-born lady, the wife of a great lord. You live in a stone castle, surrounded by the comforts of your station. Tapestries on the walls, servants to attend your needs, fine clothes to wear. But your husband, the lord, is away. He has answered the king's call to war, taking the best of his household knights and men-at-arms with him. He has been gone for months, perhaps even years on campaign. And in his absence, the responsibility for everything he has left behind, his lands, his tenants, his castle, his children, falls squarely onto your shoulders. This is not a surprise to you. It is not an unexpected burden. It is an essential part of your duty as a noble woman. The management and defense of the castle, a role known as castellany, is a responsibility you have been trained for your entire life. While your husband is the lord, you are his deputy, his trusted partner, and in his absence, you become the acting lord of the manor in all but name. This role extends far beyond simply managing the domestic household. Your duties are legal, financial, and logistical. You preside over the manorial court, listening to the disputes of the tenant-farmer's disagreement over a wandering pig, a complaint about a broken fence, and dispensing justice according to the customs of the manor. You oversee the reeve, your estate manager, ensuring that the rents are collected, whether they are paid in grain, livestock, or coin. You manage the castle's finances, paying the garrison, purchasing supplies, and keeping meticulous accounts. You are the CEO, the chief financial officer, and the chief justice of a large and complex agricultural enterprise. It is a demanding administrative job that requires intelligence, authority, and a deep understanding of your lands and people. And then one morning, the watchman in the highest tower sounds the alarm horn. A lookout comes running to you in the great hall, his face pale. An army is approaching. A rival lord, taking advantage of your husband's absence, has come to seize your lands. The war, which had been a distant affair of messengers and letters, has arrived at your doorstep. A cold knot of fear tightens in your stomach, but you do not allow it to show on your face. You know that every person within these walls, your children, your ladies in waiting, your servants, the handful of soldiers in the garrison, and the dozens of villagers from the surrounding lands who have fled to the castle for protection is now looking to you. Your courage is their courage. Your resolve is their resolve. The time for administration is over. The time for command has begun. You move with a calm and practiced authority. You have drilled for this possibility. You issue a series of sharp, clear orders. The great wooden gates of the bailey are to be barred and reinforced. The massive iron portcullis with its deadly spiked teeth, is to be dropped. The drawbridge over the moat is to be raised and locked in place. The castle is now sealed, a stone island in a sea of enemies. You summon the captain of your household guard, the man who commands the small garrison your husband left behind. He may be a seasoned veteran, a man who has seen a dozen battles, but in the absence of the Lord, his sworn duty is to you. He reports to you on the number of men he has, their readiness, the state of their arms. You listen to his counsel. You ask sharp questions, but the final decisions on how to arrange the defense, where to place the archers, and how to respond to the enemy's moves are yours. You are the commander-in-chief. Next, you turn to the logistics of the siege. You head to the storerooms with your steward to take a meticulous inventory of your supplies. How many barrels of flour are in the granary? How much salted meat and dried fish are in the larder? How many casks of wine and ale are in the cellars? How many arrows and crossbow bolts are in the armory? A siege is a battle against time and hunger. You immediately implement strict rationing for every person within the walls, ensuring that your precious resources can be stretched for as long as possible. Suddenly, your seemingly domestic knowledge of the castle's pantry has become the most critical strategic information in your arsenal. You might not know how to wield a sword, but you know exactly how many weeks your people can survive on the food you have. It's a bit like planning for a very, very long camping trip, except the neighbors are actively trying to kill you. Outside your walls, the enemy army makes its camp. You watch from the battlements as they begin to construct their siege engines. You see them building great wooden catapults, known as trebuchets, designed to hurl massive stones at your walls. You see them building tall siege towers, which they will attempt to roll up to your ramparts. You see them constructing a heavy roof battering ram to smash down your gates. The slow, methodical work of the siege begins. They will try to break you with psychological warfare as well. They might shout taunts and insults up at your defenders, questioning their loyalty to a female commander. They might parade prisoners they have captured from your lands in front of the castle gates. They might launch the severed heads of animals, or even people, over your walls to spread fear and disease. Through it all, you must remain a beacon of calm and unwavering resolve. You make daily tours of the castle walls, speaking with the archers, offering words of encouragement to the men-at-arms, and ensuring that morale remains high. Your serene and determined presence is your most powerful weapon. You are now a military commander, a woman holding a powerful position in the masculine world of warfare. How is this perceived by the outside world? When the male chroniclers of your time, who are almost all monks, write about your actions, how do they portray you? This is a fascinating question, and historians still argue about it. When a chronicler praised a lady for her successful defense of a castle, was he celebrating her for her strength and martial prowess? Or was he carefully framing her actions to fit within traditional feminine ideals? In some cases, chroniclers would praise a female commander by ascribing masculine virtues to her. They might write that she had the heart of a man in the body of a woman, or that she showed a masculine spirit in her commands. For these writers, the highest possible compliment they could pay a successful woman was to say she was acting like a man. Her success was seen as an exception to her gender, a temporary adoption of male courage. However, other historians argue that this was not the most common approach. They suggest that chroniclers were often very careful to praise you not for being a warrior, but for being an exemplary and loyal wife. Your defense of the castle was not framed as an act of personal ambition or a desire for military glory. Instead, it was presented as the ultimate act of feminine domestic duty. You were not fighting to conquer new lands. You were fighting to protect your husband's home. You were not seeking power for yourself. You were safeguarding your children's inheritance. In this way, your command of a military garrison could be seen as a natural extension of your role as the keeper of the household, making your bravery an act of supreme feudal and wifely loyalty, not a shocking transgression of gender roles. History is filled with the stories of these formidable women. In the early 13th century, a woman named Nicola de la Haye inherited the position of Castellan of Lincoln Castle and successfully defended it against a major siege during the First Barons' War. In the 14th century, during the wars between England and Scotland, Agnes Randolph, the Countess of Dunbar, became a legend. Known as Black Agnes, she commanded the defense of Dunbar Castle for 5 months against an English siege. She was famous for her defiance, reportedly sending her ladies-in-waiting out in their fine dresses to dust the battlements with their handkerchiefs after they had been struck by English siege engines, a magnificent gesture of contempt for the enemy's efforts. In the Breton War of Succession, women like Jeanne de Penthièvre and Joanna of Flanders were not just defenders of castles, but active military leaders and political players in their own right. You stand on the highest tower of your castle, the wind whipping your veil and the banner of your husband's house snapping above you. Below, the enemy camp is a sprawling city of tents and fires, a constant, menacing presence. The first great stones from their trebuchets are beginning to crash against your outer walls. The sound a deep, sickening thud that reverberates through the entire castle. The fate of your home, your family, and your people rests entirely on your decisions, your strategic thinking, your management of resources, and your personal courage. You are a noble woman, a wife, and a mother. And for the long and dangerous months of this siege, you are also a general. Your command of the strategy from this high tower is a huge and exhausting responsibility. But in the heat of a direct assault on the walls, your role, and the roles of every woman in this castle, will shift from the strategic to the tactical. A desperate, hands-on fight for survival, using a very particular set of weapons and methods suited to the grim reality of defending your home. Your command of the strategy from the high tower is a huge and exhausting responsibility. But the time for detached observation is over. The blare of enemy horns cuts through the air, and a great roar goes up from their camp. They are launching a full-scale assault. A massive, wheeled siege tower, a wooden monster covered in wet animal hides to protect it from fire, is being pushed towards your main wall by dozens of straining men. Swarms of other soldiers are advancing with long ladders, their shields held above their heads to protect them from your archers. The true test of your leadership and the courage of everyone within these walls has begun. In this moment of supreme crisis, the normal social order of the castle dissolves. The carefully defined roles and hierarchies are temporarily erased by the urgent, all-consuming need for survival. Every able-bodied person now becomes a defender. The stable boy, the cook, the baker, the priest, they all have a role to play. And you, the lady of the castle, along with your ladies-in-waiting, your chambermaids, your laundresses, and all the village women who have taken refuge here, are now a vital part of the defense force. Your battle station is the wall walk, the stone rampart at the very top of your castle's defenses. But your arsenal is not one of swords and axes. The weapons you and your women wield are extensions of the domestic world you command. Everyday objects now turned to deadly purpose. Your primary and most exhausting task is simply to keep the male defenders supplied with things to throw. The single most effective defense against men climbing ladders is to drop heavy objects on their heads. You organize and lead chains of women and boys, a human conveyor belt running from the courtyard to the battlements, hauling heavy rocks, broken pieces of masonry, and any other weighty object that can be lifted. The work is grueling, your muscles screaming in protest, but you do not stop. At the same time, you have fires roaring in the courtyard, with great cauldrons balanced over them. You are boiling anything and everything that can be used as a weapon. The most obvious is water. A cascade of boiling water poured down upon a group of men at the base of the wall is a terrifyingly effective deterrent. But even better than water is hot sand. You have cauldrons filled with sand heating over the fires. When this is poured down, it has an insidious quality that water lacks. It gets inside a soldier's armor, lodging between the metal plates in his padded gambeson, or down his collar and inside his helmet. It causes excruciating, inescapable burns that can incapacitate a man far more effectively than a simple scalding. Another powder you might have in your arsenal is quicklime. This is a caustic, alkaline powder, normally used for tanning or making mortar. When thrown from the battlements, it creates a choking, white cloud. If it gets in the attacker's eyes, it causes intense pain and temporary blindness, making them perfect targets for your archers, or causing them to lose their grip on a ladder. This is where your domestic knowledge becomes truly weaponized. You remember the lye that your laundresses used to make the harsh soap for washing the castle's linen. Lye is a powerful chemical caustic. You now order it to be mixed with the boiling water. The resulting concoction that you pour down from the walls not only scalds the enemy soldiers, but also inflicts terrible chemical burns. In the most desperate of sieges, you might even turn to the grim but effective tactic of weaponizing human waste. The contents of the castle's latrines, the garderobes that empty down the sides of the walls, are collected in buckets and dumped upon the attackers below. It is not just a profoundly disgusting and demoralizing experience for the men trying to climb the ladders. The high concentration of ammonia and bacteria in the waste could easily cause any open wound to become lethally infected. It is the lowest tech, but perhaps most effective form of biological warfare. A wry historian might call it the ultimate form of psychological warfare. A truly unforgettable expression of your contempt for the enemy. While all this is happening, you are also the acting quartermaster for the soldiers on the walls. You organize the women to keep the archers and crossbowmen supplied with ammunition, rushing baskets of arrows and bolts to them so they never run out at a critical moment. You bring skins of water and wine to the exhausted defenders, who are fighting in heavy armor under a hail of enemy fire. You also become a mobile first aid station. Using the herbal knowledge you possess, you quickly bandage minor cuts and wounds on the spot, allowing a soldier to get back into the fight instead of having to retreat from the wall. But did you and the other women ever take a more active role? Did you ever pick up a weapon and join the fight directly? This is a fascinating question, and historians still argue about how common it was for women to use conventional weapons during a siege. The longbow was almost certainly out of the question. It was a specialist weapon that required immense upper body strength and years of dedicated training to use effectively. But the crossbow was a different matter. A crossbow could be loaded by using your feet and a lever, aimed and fired by someone without the same brute strength required for a longbow. It was the perfect defensive weapon to be fired from the safety of a narrow arrow slit. It seems entirely practical and logical that in a desperate assault when every hand was needed, you and your ladies would have picked up crossbows to add to the defensive fire. Some medieval manuscript illuminations do appear to show women on castle walls, firing crossbows or throwing rocks. However, other historians argue that these depictions are rare and may be symbolic or artistic license. They point out that when the male chroniclers of the time mention a woman fighting directly, they almost always highlight it as something remarkable, shocking, and worthy of special note, which suggests that it was not, in fact, the norm. The deep-seated social taboos against women participating in organized combat were incredibly powerful, even in the heat of a siege. It was one thing to throw a rock or a bucket of hot sand that could be seen as an extension of a domestic role. It was another thing entirely to wield a military weapon. Throughout the long, terrifying hours of the assault, you are not confined to one place. You are constantly moving along the wall walk, your commander's eye taking in the entire battle. You are not just fighting. You are managing, observing, and directing the flow of the defense. You see that the enemy is concentrating their ladder teams against a section of the wall near the west tower, and you shout orders to direct more men-at-arms to that spot. You notice that the archers on the gatehouse are running low on arrows, and you dispatch a young boy to run to the armory for more. You see a flicker of orange on one of the wooden hoardings that overhang the wall, where an enemy fire arrow has struck, and you immediately organize a bucket brigade of servants to douse the flames before they can take hold. Your cool-headed management of the chaos is as vital to the defense as any single soldier's fighting prowess. The story of Jean Hachette, or Joan the Hatchet, from the French city of Beauvais, is a famous, if perhaps embellished, example of this kind of female heroism. In 1472, the city was besieged by the powerful armies of Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy. During a major assault, a Burgundian standard-bearer managed to reach the top of the wall and was about to plant his banner, a symbol that the defenses had been breached. At that moment, a young woman named Jeanne supposedly leaped forward, grabbed a small axe, killed the standard-bearer, and hurled his banner down into the ditch below. Her ferocious, decisive action was said to have rallied the flagging defenders, who pushed the attackers back and saved the city. To this day, she is celebrated as a local heroine, a symbol of a woman's courage in the heat of battle. The sun is beginning to set, and the enemy horns sound the retreat. The assault has been repelled. The great siege tower stands smoldering and broken near your wall. The ground below is littered with the bodies of the enemy and their abandoned ladders. A ragged cheer goes up from your exhausted defenders. You stand on the battlements, your fine dress now covered in soot and grime, your ears ringing from the noise of battle, your muscles aching from hours of hauling and shouting. You have looked death directly in the face, and you have seen the women of your household, women you normally see spinning thread or baking bread, transformed into fierce and determined defenders, their hands blistered from hot cauldrons and their voices hoarse from shouting encouragement. You have proven to yourself and to the enemy that the defense of this castle is not just a man's game. It is the collective effort of an entire community. Your ability to withstand this direct assault is a major victory, but you know the war is far from over. A siege is a long and patient struggle. The enemy, having failed to take your castle by storm, may now settle in for the long haul, content to try and starve you out, to cut you off from all hope of relief from the outside world. In this new, slow, and grinding phase of the war, victory may depend less on rocks and boiling water and more on intelligence and communication. It will depend on your ability to know what the enemy is planning, and your ability to get a secret message out to your allies, begging for a relief army to be sent. This is where the hidden war, the war of spies, secrets, and courageous messengers begins. The assault is repelled. The enemy retreats to their camp, leaving their dead and their broken siege tower behind. You are covered in soot, your ears ringing, your muscles aching. You have proven that the defense of a castle is not just a man's game. It is a community's effort. Your ability to withstand this direct assault is a major victory, a testament to your leadership and the courage of your people. But you know this is only the beginning. A siege is a long and patient war of attrition. The enemy, having failed to take your castle by storm, will now settle in for the slow, grinding work of starving you out. They will encircle your castle completely, cutting you off from all hope of reinforcement or resupply from the outside world. In this new, slow and desperate phase of the war, victory may depend less on rocks and boiling water, and more on intelligence and communication. Your survival, and the survival of everyone within these walls, now hinges on two critical questions. What is the enemy planning next? And can you get a message to your allies, begging them to send a relief army? This is where the hidden war begins, the war of secrets and spies, of quiet courage and immense risk. And for this war, your most effective weapon is one the enemy will never see coming: a woman. You stand in your private solar late one night, the castle silent around you. Before you is a map of the surrounding lands. Your food stores are dwindling. Your garrison is exhausted. Your only hope is to get a message to your husband's army, or to a friendly lord in a neighboring county, informing them of your plight and the strength of the enemy force. But how? The castle is surrounded. Any man-at-arms or knight who attempts to slip out would be instantly recognizable as a soldier. He would be hunted down and killed before he got a mile. And so you make a decision. You will send one of your own women. You summon a trusted servant, perhaps a young, clever woman who has served you for years, someone who knows the local landscape. You choose her, not because she is weak, but because her weakness, in the eyes of the enemy, is her greatest strength. In the rigidly defined world of medieval society, war is the exclusive domain of men. A woman traveling on the road is not perceived as a military or political agent. She is just a woman, a peasant girl heading to the next market to sell eggs, a pilgrim on her way to a distant shrine, a wife searching for her husband who has gone off to war. Her gender makes her socially invisible to the military gaze. The soldiers in the enemy camp will not see a threat. They will see a woman, and they will likely ignore her. This perceived insignificance is the perfect disguise. The mission is one of supreme danger, and the preparations are made in absolute secrecy. The message itself must be tiny and easily concealed. Your scribe writes out the vital information: your dwindling supplies, the enemy's numbers, the location of their siege engines, and a minuscule scrap of parchment or fine vellum. Now you must hide it. This is where female ingenuity comes to the fore. You might have the message rolled into a tight, thin scroll and tucked deep into the hollowed-out end of a pilgrim's wooden staff. Or it might be carefully sewn into the thick, dirty hem of the simple woolen dress she will wear. Or, in a particularly clever move, it might be baked into the very center of a small, hard loaf of bread, which she will carry in a pouch as her meager provisions for the journey. Now, imagine you are this woman. You are about to step out of the world you know and into a world of extreme peril. You shed your servant's livery, the clothes that mark you as belonging to this castle. You dress instead in the rough, homespun tunic of a poor peasant woman, a garment that is coarse, patched, and smells faintly of wood smoke. You rub dirt on your face and into your hands. You practice walking with the weary, stooped posture of a laborer. You must erase every trace of your connection to the noble household. You must become utterly, hopelessly, and safely unremarkable. In a world where the newly rich peasants are trying desperately to look like nobles, your mission is the exact opposite: to look as poor and insignificant as humanly possible. In the dead of night, you are led to a quiet, remote section of the castle wall, far from the main gate. A rope is tied securely around your waist. You whisper a final prayer, and then you are lowered down into the darkness. Your feet touch the cool, damp earth outside the castle for the first time in months. You are alone. You pull your hood over your head and melt into the shadows, your heart pounding a frantic rhythm against your ribs. Your first great challenge is to navigate the enemy's siege camp, which encircles your home like a hungry wolf. A direct approach is too risky. Instead, you wait in a ditch until the first gray light of dawn. You time your movement to coincide with the daily routine of the camp. You see other women, the camp followers we have already met, beginning to stir from the outskirts of the camp, heading out into the fields and woods to forage. You simply join them. You become one of them. Another anonymous woman with a basket, keeping your head down and your eyes averted. The enemy soldiers, waking and preparing for their own day, barely give you a second glance. You are beneath their notice. You are invisible, and with every step you take, you are walking out of the circle of danger and towards the open road. The journey ahead is long and fraught with peril. You must travel for days, perhaps a week, through unfamiliar territory. You sleep in barns or in the woods. You beg for food at farmhouses and monasteries, relying on the charity given to poor travelers. You must be constantly on your guard. The roads are not safe. They are plagued by bandits, by deserters from the very army you are trying to evade, and by desperate men who would harm a woman traveling alone. Every approaching stranger is a potential threat. You must use all of your wits, your courage, and your ability to appear humble and harmless to survive. You are one woman on one desperate life or death mission. But did more organized female spy networks exist? This is a fascinating question that historians still argue about. Were women only ever used as individual agents for specific one-off missions like yours? Or is there evidence of more permanent, structured intelligence networks run by and for women? The evidence for formal networks is scarce, for an obvious reason. Espionage is a secret business. People do not tend to keep detailed written records of their illegal, clandestine activities. The dominant view is that women were typically used on an ad hoc basis, valued for their unique ability to cross enemy lines, but not as part of a standing intelligence service. However, some historians, reading between the lines of diplomatic correspondence and noble household accounts, suggest that something more organized may have existed. A powerful and intelligent noblewoman, like a queen or a duchess, might have maintained her own informal network of female agents. These could be her ladies-in-waiting, traveling on the pretext of visiting relatives. They could be the wives of merchants, whose business took them into different territories. They could even be nuns, traveling from one convent to another. These women, moving through the world under a cloak of social invisibility, could gather information on political sentiment, troop movements, and local gossip, reporting back to their mistress. It would have been a network based on personal loyalty and shared gender. A subtle, but potentially powerful tool in the great political games of the era. Whether you are part of an organized network or on a solo mission, the danger of being discovered is absolute. If a common soldier catches you, the threat is one of personal, physical violence. But if your true purpose is discovered by an enemy commander, your fate is far worse. You are not a soldier. You will not be treated as a prisoner of war to be ransomed. You are a spy, and the penalty for spying is universal and unwavering. You will be interrogated, very likely under torture, to extract every piece of information you possess. And once you have told them everything you know, you will be executed, probably in a brutal and public manner, as a warning to others. This is the risk you have accepted. There are scattered accounts of such brave women throughout history. During the long and complex wars between England and Scotland, women on both sides acted as couriers, carrying secret messages across the heavily guarded border. Later, during the religious wars of the 16th century, women were instrumental in carrying clandestine correspondence for figures like Mary, Queen of Scots, sometimes hiding the tiny, coded letters in their shoes or in their elaborate hairstyles. After days of walking, your feet bleeding and your stomach aching with hunger, you finally see the banners of a friendly army in the distance. You have made it. You stumble into the camp, a ragged, exhausted figure, and demand to be taken to the commander. You are brought before a great lord, and from within the hard, stale loaf of bread you have carried all this way, you produce the tiny, precious scroll of parchment. Your mission is a success. You have used your gender, your supposed weakness and insignificance, as the ultimate weapon, a key to unlock the siege of your home. Your name will likely never be recorded in the official chronicles of the war. Your immense courage will remain a secret, known only to your lady and the few who planned your journey. Your story, and the stories of countless other women like you, formed a hidden but vital part of the tapestry of medieval warfare. And while you operated in a world of secrets, deception, and immense personal risk, another group of women operated much more openly, providing a service that was just as vital to an army's survival: the business of supply. Your courage will likely go unrecorded by the chroniclers, a secret known only to your lady and a few trusted officials. Your role, and the roles of countless women like you, formed a hidden but vital part of the fabric of medieval warfare. You operated in a world of secrets and deception, driven by loyalty and a desperate need to save your home. But while you were undertaking a mission of clandestine communication, another group of women was operating much more openly within the army camp, driven by a different, but no less powerful motivator: profit. This was the world of the female merchant, the sutler, the vivandière. This was the business of supply. Imagine your position now is not one of a loyal servant on a secret mission, but one of a pragmatic and independent entrepreneur. You have chosen to follow the army not because your husband is a soldier, but because you see the army for what it is: a massive, mobile city of thousands of men, a captive market with predictable needs and cash in its pockets. The official army supply chain, the commissariat, is concerned with providing the absolute basics: bulk rations of grain, salted meat, and ale. It is slow, often inefficient, and provides no comforts. You have identified a gap in the market. The soldiers crave small luxuries, better food, and stronger drink, and you are here to sell it to them. You are what is known as a sutler, a civilian merchant who accompanies an army to sell provisions. In later centuries, particularly in France, you would be known by the more famous and romanticized term, vivandière. Your place of business is the baggage train, that same sprawling, chaotic world we explored earlier. But you are not a laundress or a simple camp follower. You are a shopkeeper. Your shop might be a sturdy two-wheeled cart, its sides folding down to create a makeshift counter. Or it might be a small tent, a little stall set up amidst the chaos of the camp, from which you conduct your daily business. Your inventory is a carefully curated collection of goods designed to appeal to a soldier's every need and desire. The core of your business, of course, is food and drink, but better than the official issue. The army provides the men with hard, gritty campaign bread. You, however, have fresh-baked savory pies, filled with meat or cheese, that you baked this morning over your own fire. The army provides a weak, watery, small ale. You have a barrel of strong, good-quality ale that you bought from a local brewer in the last town the army passed through, and you sell it by the mug at a significant markup. You might offer a chunk of good cheese, a string of sausages, or other small delicacies that provide a welcome and flavorful relief from the monotony of the standard rations. But your real profits come from the value-added goods, the small necessities and luxuries that the army does not provide at all. You sell simple sewing kits, often called a housewife, a small cloth roll containing needles, sturdy thread, and a few buttons. so a soldier can perform his own basic repairs on his torn tunic or loose hose. You sell writing supplies? You sell writing supplies? A few sheets of precious paper, a small pot of ink, and a stick of sealing wax for the literate soldier who wishes to write a letter home. In later centuries, you would be one of the first to bring new and desirable commodities to the camp, like tobacco and cheap clay pipes. You sell the small things that make a hard life more bearable. A bar of better quality soap, a sturdy wooden comb, a small polished metal mirror. Your role can even extend beyond simple retail. You might function as the camp's informal banker and pawnbroker. A soldier who has gambled away his pay might come to you for a small loan to tide him over until the next payday. A loan you provide at a very high rate of interest. Or a man in need of cash might leave a valuable personal item with you, a ring, a good dagger as collateral for a loan. You are a vital part of the camp's informal economy, providing credit and liquidity in a world where official banking is non-existent. But what is your official status in this military machine? Are you a licensed and regulated part of the army? Or are you just an opportunistic hanger-on? This is a question historians still argue about, as the practice varied widely depending on the time, the place, and the specific army. In some more organized and disciplined armies, particularly later in the medieval and into the early modern period, you would have to be officially licensed. The army's commander, the marshal, would issue a limited number of licenses to sutlers, granting them the exclusive right to trade with the soldiers. In exchange for this privilege, you would have to pay a fee to the army command. Your prices would be regulated to prevent outrageous price gouging, and the quality of your goods would be subject to inspection. An aleconner might be tasked not only with tasting the ale produced by the alewives, but also the ale being sold by sutlers like you. In this system, you are an official, if civilian, contractor, assigned a specific place in the line of march, and granted a measure of protection by the military authorities. In many other cases, however, the system was far more informal. You were essentially operating in a tolerated black market. The army commanders knew that their men needed your services to maintain morale, so they turned a blind eye to your presence. But you had no official status, no license, and no protection. You were simply a civilian who was allowed to trail along with the baggage train, taking a massive personal risk in the hope of a massive financial reward. You could be expelled from the camp at any time, for any reason, at the commander's whim. Your daily life is one of hard work and constant vigilance. You must be a savvy entrepreneur. As the army moves through the countryside, you have to constantly restock your inventory, buying supplies from local farms and villages. You have to be a shrewd negotiator, haggling with farmers for their cheese or with local brewers for their ale, trying to get the best price so you can maximize your own profit. You have to be a tough salesperson, dealing with your customers, the soldiers, who are a rough and often unruly crowd. And you must be constantly on guard against theft. Your cart, filled with desirable goods like food, alcohol, and money, is a very tempting target for a desperate or unscrupulous soldier. A wry observer might note that you likely have the most aggressive and hands-on loss prevention policy in the entire retail sector. Over time, your role as the vivandière becomes a celebrated and iconic part of military life. You are often depicted in art and literature as a tough, resourceful, and sharp-tongued woman, more than capable of holding her own in the hypermasculine world of the army. The classic image is of a woman with a small cask of brandy or wine strapped to her back, a cup in her hand, moving among the soldiers, even on the very edge of the battlefield, offering a restorative drink and a word of encouragement. You are a complex figure, seen as both a caring, almost maternal provider of comfort, and a hard-nosed, profit-driven businessperson. The risks you face are immense. Like every other camp follower, you are vulnerable to the diseases that sweep through the camp. You are also at risk of violence from your own customers. Your business itself is incredibly precarious. If the army is forced to make a hasty retreat, you may have to abandon your cart and all your valuable stock, losing everything you own in an instant. And you are always at the mercy of the army's command. If the Duke decides that you have been selling watered-down wine or charging too much for your sausages, he could have you flogged, have your goods confiscated, and have you expelled from the camp, your livelihood destroyed in a single moment. As the day ends, you pull the canvas cover over your cart and count the coins you have taken in. It has been a good day. The men were paid this morning, and they were thirsty. Your 2 barrels of ale are empty, and your coin pouch is heavy. You are a woman, likely alone, operating a business in one of the most dangerous environments imaginable. Your role is not one of battlefield glory or strategic command. It is a role defined by relentless, pragmatic enterprise. But in your own way, by providing the small comforts, the taste of better food, the warmth of strong drink, you are making the brutal, miserable life of the common soldier just a little more bearable. You are a crucial part of the human machinery that keeps the army going. And while you and your fellow merchants represent the vital commercial lifeblood of the army, there are, on very rare and extraordinary occasions, women in this world who transcend all of these support roles entirely, who pick up not a cooking pot or a coin pouch, but a sword and a banner, and step into the most masculine space of all, the role of the warrior and the divinely inspired commander. You are a crucial part of the human machinery that keeps the army going, and while you and your fellow merchants represent the vital commercial lifeblood of the army, there are, on very rare and extraordinary occasions, women in this world who transcend all of these support roles entirely, who pick up not a cooking pot or a coin pouch, but a sword and a banner, and step into the most masculine space of all, the role of the warrior and the divinely inspired commander. And the story of this profound exception, the name that burns brighter than any other, is the story of Joan of Arc. To understand her, you must first understand the world that she was born into. Imagine that you are no longer a camp follower or a noble lady. You are a young peasant girl named Jeanne, living in the small, obscure village of Domremy in eastern France. The year is 1425. Your world is defined by 2 great forces: your deep and simple Catholic faith, and the seemingly endless war with England that has been raging for nearly a century. France is a broken and divided kingdom. The English and their powerful Burgundian allies control the entire northern half of your country, including the capital city of Paris. Your king is not truly a king. He is the Dauphin, the uncrowned heir, Charles, a weak and indecisive young man on the verge of total defeat. Your people are demoralized. Your armies are beaten. France, it seems, is dying. It is in this context of desperation that your own strange and remarkable journey begins. Around the age of 13, you begin to experience something extraordinary. While you are out in your father's garden, you see a brilliant light and hear a voice speaking to you. You are terrified, but the voice is gentle and reassuring. You soon come to identify the voices as those of Saint Michael the Archangel, the great warrior of God, along with Saint Catherine of Alexandria and Saint Margaret of Antioch. At first, their messages are simple: personal instructions to be a good and pious girl. But as you grow older, and as the situation in France grows more desperate, the mission they give you becomes clear, specific, and utterly astounding. It is you, Jeanne, an illiterate peasant girl who has never left her village, who must drive the English out of France and who must lead your Dauphin to the sacred city of Reims to be crowned King Charles VII, the one true king of France. One might wryly note that this is a slightly more ambitious set of life goals than most teenagers have. For several years, you keep these visions a secret, but by the time you are 16 or 17, the voices become insistent. You can no longer ignore them, and so you begin your impossible quest. You travel to a nearby town and manage to convince the local royal commander, a man named Robert de Baudricourt, to grant you an audience. At first, he laughs at you and sends you away, but you are persistent, and your simple, unwavering conviction begins to win people over. You return, and this time, you correctly predict the outcome of a nearby battle, an event you could not possibly have known about through normal means. Shaken and impressed, Baudricourt finally agrees to provide you with an escort to take you to the Dauphin's court at Chinon. For the long and dangerous journey across enemy-held territory, you make a practical decision that will later have fatal consequences. You cut your hair short in the style of a man, and you dress in male clothing, a tunic, hose, and boots. It is a sensible disguise, a way to protect yourself from the dangers a young woman would face traveling alone with a group of soldiers. You arrive at the great castle of Chinon, a simple peasant girl in men's clothes, and you are brought before the royal court. The Dauphin Charles, a man famous for his skepticism and indecision, decides to test you. He hides himself amongst the throng of his richly dressed courtiers, placing another man on the throne. But you are not fooled. You walk through the crowd, straight to the disguised Dauphin, and you bow before him. You tell him that God has sent you, and that you will see him crowned. He is still not entirely convinced. He has you examined for weeks by a panel of the most learned theologians in his kingdom. They grill you, testing your faith, searching for any hint of heresy or deception. But at the end of their examination, they can find nothing wrong. You are, they conclude, a good and pious Christian. And for Charles, who is in a desperate situation with nothing left to lose, this is enough. He decides to take the gamble. As one of his advisors reportedly said, France was already lost. You could only be the source of its salvation. And so, the unthinkable happens. You, the teenage peasant girl, are given command of the French army. You are fitted with a beautiful suit of white plate armor, custom made for your body. You are given a great white banner, painted with the images of Jesus and Mary, and fringed with gold. You are given a war horse and a company of attendants. The veteran French commanders, men like La Hire and the Duke of Alençon, are initially baffled and deeply skeptical. They see a child, a girl, presuming to command them. But your effect on the common soldiers is electric. They are weary, demoralized, and have known nothing but defeat. They see you with your simple, unwavering faith and your absolute conviction in victory. And they see a miracle. They see God's messenger. You become a living symbol of hope. Your first great test is the city of Orléans. The city has been under a brutal siege by the English for over 7 months. It is the key to the entire Loire Valley, and it is on the verge of falling. A defeat that would likely have meant the end of the French cause. You arrive with your army. You dismiss the cautious, defensive strategies of the other commanders. You insist on bold, direct assaults against the English fortifications, and in a stunning series of attacks over the course of just 9 days, you lead the French army to a complete and shattering victory. The siege is broken. The English are in full, panicked retreat. It is a turning point in the 100 Years' War. A victory so sudden and so total that it seems to many to be nothing less than a miracle. But what was the source of your incredible power and conviction? What were these voices that guided you? This is the great, unanswerable mystery at the very heart of your story. A question that historians, theologians, and psychologists have argued about for centuries. The simplest explanation, and the one you yourself held to with unwavering consistency until the very end, is that it was all true. You were a genuine religious mystic, a chosen vessel of God. Your visions were real. Your victories were divine miracles. You were, quite simply, a saint. Modern skeptics, trying to find a rational explanation for your experiences, have proposed various medical theories. Could you have suffered from a condition like temporal lobe epilepsy, or perhaps schizophrenia, which are known to cause vivid auditory and visual hallucinations? Could the visions have been a product of a mind under extreme psychological stress, shaped by the intense piety of your age? A third school of thought proposes a different kind of explanation, one that credits you not with divine connection or with illness, but with a kind of genius. This view suggests that you may not have been a mystic, but you were an exceptionally intelligent, charismatic, and patriotic young woman. You understood, on a deep and intuitive level, that in your deeply religious and hierarchical society, the only possible way that you, a peasant girl, could ever be given a platform, let alone command of an army, was to claim that you had a direct mandate from God. The language of prophecy was the only language of power available to you. In this view, you were a brilliant political and military strategist, cleverly using the only tools at your disposal to achieve your goals. Whatever the source of your power, your success continued. After Orléans, you led the Dauphin and his army on a daring march deep into enemy territory, to the city of Reims. Reims was the traditional, sacred site for the coronation of French kings. There, in the great cathedral, you stood by his side, your banner in your hand, as the holy oil was placed on his brow, and he was crowned King Charles VII. You had accomplished the second part of your mission, but your meteoric rise was to be followed by a swift and tragic fall. You continued to lead the army, but you were eventually captured in a minor skirmish by Burgundian soldiers, who then sold you, their most valuable prisoner, to their English had a political problem. English had a political problem. Your victories had crowned their rival. They needed to undo the magic of your story, and so they put you on trial, not for being a soldier, but for being a heretic. They needed to prove that your victories were not the work of God, but the work of the devil. The trial, held in the English stronghold of Rouen, was a masterpiece of legal and psychological pressure, and the charges that the prosecutors focused on are incredibly revealing. They spent very little time on your military actions. Instead, they obsessed over two things: your claim to have direct contact with God through your voices, which they argued was a heretical bypassing of the church's authority, and most of all, your clothing. They returned again and again to your insistence on wearing men's clothes and cutting your hair short. This was framed not as a practical choice for a soldier, but as a deliberate and abominable violation of the law of God as laid down in the Bible. Your armor, your tunic, your short hair, these were presented as the outward signs of your inner heresy, a rebellion against the natural order of men and women. After a long and grueling trial, where you, an illiterate teenager, brilliantly defended yourself against dozens of learned theologians, you were eventually worn down, tricked into a partial confession, and convicted. In the marketplace of Rouen, at the age of just 19, you were tied to a tall stake and burned to death. Your end was tragic, but your story was just beginning. You instantly became a martyr and a powerful symbol of French nationalism. 25 years after your death, King Charles VII, The very man you had placed on the throne authorized a posthumous retrial that officially overturned the verdict, cleared your name, and declared that you had been executed unjustly. And nearly 500 years later, the Catholic Church, the same institution whose representatives had condemned you, officially canonized you as a saint. You stand amidst the fire and smoke of the battlefield at Orleans, your white banner held high against the sky. You are a paradox, a figure who should not exist in your own time, a peasant who commands nobles, a teenager who counsels kings, a woman who is the victorious general of a great national army. Your spectacular story is the ultimate exception that proves the rule of how limited the roles for women in warfare were. It was a story that required a claim of direct divine intervention to even be possible. Your astonishing rise and your heartbreaking fall became a legend that has echoed through the centuries, a testament to one of the most remarkable individuals in all of history. But while you are the most famous, you are not the only woman whose story has been passed down from the age of war. In the great, epic, and multi-generational struggles known as the Crusades, thousands of other women, both noble and common, embarked on their own perilous armed pilgrimage, facing unique dangers and performing vital roles far from the familiar landscapes of their European homes. You are a paradox, an impossibility in your own time, a peasant, a teenager, a woman, and the victorious general of a great army. Your spectacular rise and tragic fall became a legend that has echoed through the centuries. But while you are the most famous, you are not the only woman whose story has been passed down from the age of war. In the great, epic, and multi-generational struggles known as the Crusades, thousands of other women, both noble and common, embarked on their own perilous armed pilgrimage, facing unique dangers and performing vital roles far from the familiar landscapes of their European homes. Imagine now that you are no longer a singular, divinely inspired warrior. You are one of the thousands of anonymous women caught up in the great wave of religious fervor that launched the First Crusade at the end of the 11th century. You stand in a crowded field, listening to a charismatic preacher, perhaps a legate sent from the Pope himself. He speaks of the desecration of the holy city of Jerusalem, of the suffering of Christian pilgrims in the East. He calls upon the knights and warriors of Christendom to take up arms and march to reclaim the Holy Sepulchre, the very tomb of Christ, and he offers an irresistible reward for this service: a plenary indulgence, the complete remission of all your sins. This call is not just for men. A crusade is not merely a military campaign. It is, at its heart, a great armed pilgrimage. And pilgrimage is a spiritual act open to all. As a pious woman, you have just as much sin to be absolved of as any man. You have just as much desire to see the holy places and to walk in the footsteps of your Savior. And so, alongside your husband, your brother, or your son, you take the cross. You sew a simple cloth cross onto the shoulder of your tunic, a public declaration of your vow, and you prepare to leave your home, your village, and everything you have ever known behind. The journey itself is the first great ordeal, a trial that will break all but the strongest. You are part of a vast, sprawling migration, a whole society on the move. The baggage train of a crusading army is even larger, more chaotic, and more diverse than the ones we have already seen. It is a slow-moving river of humanity, stretching for miles across the landscape, churning up clouds of dust. And you are in the thick of it. You perform the same essential roles as any camp follower in a European war, but under conditions that are 100 times more difficult and dangerous. If you are a woman of common birth, you are still the army's laundress, its cook, its mender of clothes. But now, You must find a stream to wash clothes in a foreign and often hostile land. You cannot easily buy food from the local towns and villages you pass through. The inhabitants may be suspicious of your vast, hungry army and refuse to trade, or they may be of a different faith entirely. You must survive on the army's official rations, when they are available, and on whatever you can forage from a landscape whose plants and animals are completely alien to you, even if you are a high-born lady, the wife of a great crusading baron. This journey is one of immense hardship. You may have your own retinue of servants, your own fine tent, and chests filled with your clothing, but the veneer of aristocratic comfort is thin. The most famous example of this is Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful women in Europe, who accompanied her husband, King Louis VII of France, on the Second Crusade. The chroniclers of the time, who were all men, wrote with scandalized disapproval of the immense baggage train she brought with her, filled with her ladies-in-waiting, troubadours, and countless chests of dresses and finery. They complained that she was treating the solemn pilgrimage like a courtly procession, and that her wagons were slowing the entire army down. A modern observer might wryly note that the complaints about how much luggage a woman packs for a trip have a very long history. But for noble and commoner alike, the journey was filled with unique and terrible dangers. The long march across the arid, sun-blasted plains of Anatolia, in modern-day Turkey, was a recurring nightmare for every crusading army. The heat was oppressive, the water was scarce and often foul. The Seljuk Turkish horse archers, masters of hit-and-run tactics, would constantly harass the long, slow-moving column of the army, picking off stragglers and launching raids on your vulnerable baggage train. Starvation and thirst became your constant companions. You would be reduced to eating your own pack animals, the horses and donkeys that were essential for carrying your supplies. When those were gone, you would boil the leather from your shoes and belts, trying to extract some meager nourishment from them. The chronicles are filled with harrowing accounts of crusaders dying by the thousands from heat, thirst, and starvation long before they ever saw an enemy soldier. For women, there were other gender-specific dangers. The crusade was a multi-year journey. Women became pregnant and gave birth on the march. Imagine the terror of going into labor in a temporary, windswept camp in the middle of a hostile wilderness, with no shelter, minimal hygiene, and only the help of your fellow women. The chances of survival for both mother and child were slim. And then there was the ever-present threat of capture. If the army was ambushed, or if you became separated from the main group, you could be taken prisoner by Saracen forces. For a male soldier, this might mean a swift death or a life of slavery. For you, a woman, it carried the added terror of sexual violence and the threat of being forced into a harem. Given these immense hardships and dangers, how did the male chroniclers who documented the Crusades view your presence? Were you and your fellow women seen as a pious and valuable asset to the holy cause, or as a dangerous, sinful liability that weakened the army's spiritual resolve? This is a question that historians continue to debate, as the accounts are deeply contradictory. In some chronicles, you are portrayed as a figure of virtue and strength. The writer might praise the piety of the women, describing how your constant prayers and hymns help to boost the morale of the fighting men. Your practical roles are highlighted as acts of Christian charity. You are lauded for carrying water from the river to the thirsty soldiers defending the siege lines, an act of immense labor and courage under the threat of enemy fire. You are praised for tending to the wounded, for cleaning their wounds and offering them comfort, fulfilling your Christian duty to care for the sick. In this view, you are a virtuous and essential helpmeet to the holy warriors. Your suffering and your labor a vital contribution to the Crusade's success. But other chroniclers paint a very different picture. In times of defeat or hardship, they often used the women of the camp as a convenient scapegoat. They would argue that God had allowed the army to be defeated because the soldiers were engaging in sinful behavior with the women in the baggage train. They would rail against the prostitutes and the ale sellers, claiming that their presence had corrupted the army's moral fiber and angered God, who then withdrew his favor. In this view, you are not a helpmeet. You are a temptation, a liability, a walking symbol of the sin that is causing the entire holy enterprise to fail. The reality of your role likely depended entirely on the personal prejudices of the man writing the story, and on whether the army was currently winning or losing. Now, imagine you have survived the horrific march. You have reached the great city of Antioch, or even the ultimate prize, Jerusalem itself. The army now settles in for a long and difficult siege. Your role, and the role of all the non-combatants, becomes more critical than ever. The army needs to build massive siege towers and great catapults. This requires immense amounts of wood and water. You are now part of the labor force. You join the long lines of people hauling water from a distant river, not just for drinking, but to fill the great moats that the enemy has dug around the city walls. You help gather stones for the trebuchets. You carry food and supplies to the engineers and carpenters who are constructing the siege engines. During the final bloody assault on the city, you are right there, at the foot of the walls, in the heart of the danger zone. While the knights and men-at-arms are on the siege towers and the ladders, you are part of the essential support crew. You rush forward with skins of water to douse the Greek fire that the defenders are pouring down. You help carry the wounded back from the front lines, dragging them to a place of relative safety where the healers can tend to them. Your courage is not the courage of the sword, but the courage of endurance, of labor, and of compassion in the face of unimaginable violence. You stand now inside the captured walls of Jerusalem. The battle is over, and the air is thick with the metallic smell of blood and the smoke of burning buildings. You have made it. You have walked for 2,000 miles. You have endured starvation, thirst, and disease. You have witnessed horrors that will haunt you for the rest of your life. But you have reached the holiest city on earth. You have fulfilled your pilgrim's vow. Your journey, a pilgrimage of extreme faith and extreme suffering, is a testament to your resilience. Your contributions, though they will be largely ignored or even condemned by the men who will write the histories of this great event, were essential to the very survival of this holy war. Your crusade is over. But for many women back home in Europe, the end of a war is not an end to suffering. It is the beginning of a new and difficult struggle, the struggle of the survivor, the widow, the woman who is left to manage the devastating social and economic consequences of the conflict. Your journey has been one of extreme faith and extreme suffering. Your contributions, though they will be largely ignored or even condemned by the men who write the histories of this great event, were essential to the very survival of this holy war. Your crusade is over. You have returned home, or perhaps you never left, waiting for years for news of a husband, a son, or a brother who went away to fight. For many women, the end of the war is not a moment of celebration, but the beginning of a new and difficult struggle, the struggle of the survivor, the widow, the woman left to manage the devastating social and economic consequences of the conflict. Imagine you are that lady of the castle we met earlier. You have successfully defended your home against a siege, or perhaps the threat passed and your lands were spared a direct assault. But the war your husband went to has now ended. For months, you have waited in a state of anxious uncertainty. And then one day, a lone, travel-weary rider appears on the horizon, bearing the banner of your husband's commander. This is the moment you have been dreading and hoping for. the news arrives. In one scenario, the news is the worst imaginable. Your husband was killed in a distant battle, or he succumbed to a fever in the camp. You are now a widow. The initial wave of personal grief is overwhelming, but you have little time to mourn. The moment your husband's death is confirmed, the entire weight of his responsibility settles permanently onto your shoulders. You are no longer his temporary deputy. You are the sole ruler of this domain. In another, perhaps even more complicated scenario, the news is different. Your husband is alive, but he was taken captive in the final battle. He is now the prisoner of a French or an English lord, and his freedom depends on the payment of a massive ransom. The responsibility for raising this ransom falls entirely to you. And this begins one of the most grueling and stressful campaigns a medieval woman could ever undertake. The business of ransom. This is not a simple matter of writing a check. It is a long, complex, and often ruinous process of financial negotiation and fundraising. First, you must establish contact with your husband's captors to verify that he is alive and to negotiate the price of his freedom. This alone can take months of sending messengers back and forth across hostile territory. The price, when it is finally set, is often astronomical. A great lord's ransom could be the equivalent of several years' income from his entire estate, a sum designed to be crippling. Now, you must raise the money. You begin by liquidating your own personal assets. You sell your jewels, your fine clothes, your silver plates and goblets. It is not enough. You then turn to the assets of the estate. You might have to sell off several outlying manors, permanently shrinking the family's holdings. You might have to pawn a sacred family heirloom, a jewel-encrusted reliquary, to a wealthy merchant or a moneylender. And finally, you will have to levy a special tax, known as an aid, on every single tenant living on your lands. You must convene a manorial court and explain the situation, persuading your tenants to contribute to the Lord's freedom. You become a fundraiser, a financial manager, and a diplomat, all while dealing with the constant fear that your husband might die of disease in captivity before you can free him. It is a bit like running the most stressful and high-stakes crowdfunding campaign in history, with your husband's life as the ultimate goal. But let us return to the first scenario. Your husband is dead. You are a widow. In medieval society, this places you in a strange and paradoxical position. You are an object of pity, a woman who has lost her protector and her place in the social order. But at the same time, you now possess a degree of legal and economic autonomy that you have never had before in your life. As a married woman, you are under the legal authority of your husband. As a widow, you become what was known in law as a femme sole, a woman alone. You can now own property in your own name. You can sue and be sued in court. You can make contracts and run a business. If your son, the new heir, is still a minor, you become his legal guardian. This is a position of immense power. It means you have complete control over his entire inheritance, the lands, the castles, the titles until he comes of age. You are, for all intents and purposes, the ruler of the estate. All the duties you performed while your husband was away on campaign are now permanently yours. You are the one who manages the finances, who presides over the courts, who negotiates with merchants, and who commands the castle garrison. So was the high-born medieval widow a truly independent and powerful figure. A kind of proto-feminist success story, born from tragedy. Or was her newfound autonomy largely an illusion, constrained by the patriarchal society she lived in? This is a point on which historians still argue. The case for her power is strong. The legal documents are clear. A widow had dower rights, which entitled her to a life interest in a significant portion of her late husband's lands, usually 1/3. This gave her a secure independent income, and as the guardian of a wealthy heir, she could control vast estates. We have historical examples of formidable widows, like Nicolas de la Haye, whom we met earlier, or the great Eleanor of Aquitaine after the annulment of her first marriage, who wielded immense political, military, and economic power, commanding the loyalty of knights and making decisions that could shape the fate of kingdoms. However, other historians argue that this power was often temporary and heavily circumscribed. A wealthy widow controlling a strategic castle and large tracts of land was a major political prize. She would be under immense and immediate pressure from her own family and from the king himself to remarry. The king, as the ultimate overlord, often claimed the right to control the marriage of his noble widows, and he would use this right to reward a loyal knight or to secure a strategic alliance. A widow might have to fight a constant battle in the courts and at court to fend off unwanted suitors and to maintain her independence. Her freedom often lasted only as long as she could successfully navigate these intense pressures and resist the expectation that she should place herself back under the authority of a new husband. For a woman of the common classes, the experience of widowhood was different, but it could also bring a strange new kind of independence. If you were a peasant woman whose husband, a common soldier, died in the war, there was no great estate to manage, only grief and the threat of economic ruin. But if you held your land as a tenant, you might be able to take over the tenancy and continue to farm the land yourself, becoming the head of your household. If you lived in a town, you might have the opportunity to continue your husband's trade. Guild regulations, while strictly controlling membership, often had provisions for the widows of their members. A baker's widow might be allowed to continue running the bakery. A weaver's widow might take over his loom and his customers. You might be recognized by the guild as a she-merchant, allowed to run the business until your son was old enough to be admitted to the guild in his own right. It was a small and often temporary measure of economic independence, born from the tragedy of war. Your role as a widow was not just about your own survival. It was often about the survival of an entire community. If your lands had been in the path of the war, they would be ravaged. You would return to find villages burned, crops destroyed, and livestock slaughtered or driven off by the armies. Your tenants might have been killed or have fled. Your first and most important job was reconstruction. You would have to survey the damage and begin the slow, arduous process of rebuilding. You would need to entice new tenants to come and farm the abandoned lands, perhaps by offering them favorable terms, like a few years of reduced rent. You would have to invest what little capital you had in buying new seed grain and new livestock. You had to rebuild the mill, repair the church, and restore the sense of order and community that the war had shattered. You are no longer just a manager. You are a post-war developer, a rebuilder of a broken world. You stand on the battlements of your castle, the same battlements you once defended against a siege. But you are not looking out at an enemy army. You are looking out at your own lands. You see the black, charred timbers of what was once a prosperous village. You see fields lying fallow and overgrown. The war has taken your husband, but it has left you with a profound and heavy responsibility. You are the guardian of your family's legacy, the protector of your son's inheritance, and the steward of your community's slow and painful recovery. This vital role of women as widows, as mothers, as administrators, as rebuilders in dealing with the messy, difficult, and glamorous aftermath of war is one of the most important, yet least celebrated, parts of their story. It is a story not of heroic charges or dramatic last stands, but of quiet, determined, and enduring resilience. But why are these stories? The story of the laundress in the camp, the healer with her herbs, the lady commanding the defense, the spy on her secret mission, and the widow rebuilding a broken world, so often missing from the great sweeping histories medieval warfare. The final part of our journey tonight will explore how these countless contributions were overlooked or erased from the narrative, and how historians today are working to find them once again. You stand on the battlements, looking out not at an enemy army, but at your own lands. The war has taken your husband, but it has given you a new and demanding role. You are the guardian of your family's legacy and the steward of your community's recovery. This role of women as widows, as mothers, as managerson, picking up the pieces after the chaos of war, is one of the most vital, yet least celebrated, parts of their story. It is a story not of heroic charges, but of quiet resilience. But why are these stories of the laundress in the camp, the healer with her herbs, the lady commanding the defense, the spy on her secret mission, and the widow rebuilding a broken world so often missing from the great histories of medieval warfare? The final part of our journey tonight will explore how these women were overlooked or erased from the narrative, and how historians today are working to find them once again. The first and most fundamental problem is one of the source material. When you ask the question, who wrote the history of the Middle Ages? The answer is overwhelmingly simple. Men, and not just any men. The vast majority of the chroniclers, the historians of the age, were clergymen monks living and writing in the relative seclusion of a monastery, or priests and bishops attached to a royal or noble court. Imagine yourself as one of these chroniclers. Your entire world is male-dominated. Your education has been steeped in the classical texts of ancient Rome and Greece, and in the sacred texts of the Bible, all bodies of literature that, for the most part, portray women in a very specific and limited set of roles, as wives, mothers, saints, or dangerous temptresses. Your primary interest as a historian is in what you consider to be the important events of the world. You write about the great deeds of great men. You record the succession of kings, the outcomes of major battles, the political maneuvering of dukes and emperors, and the complex theological debates of the church. This is history to you. The kind of work that the women we have been exploring were doing simply did not register as important. The back-breaking labor of the laundress in the army camp, the quiet skill of the herbal healer, the logistical management of a female castellanthus was all seen as part of the domestic background noise of life, not the stuff of history. It was women's work, and therefore it was not worthy of being recorded in the great annals of the age. The chroniclers did not deliberately erase women from history. For the most part, they simply did not see them as being in history in the first place. When women do appear in the chronicles, they are often flattened into two-dimensional archetypes that fit the chronicler's worldview. You might be portrayed as the idealized saint, a pious and virtuous queen whose prayers bring victory to her husband's army. Or you might be cast as the wicked temptress, a scheming and ambitious queen who leads a good king into sin, or the camp prostitute whose presence brings God's wrath down upon the army. It is rare to find a depiction of a woman as a complex, competent, and multifaceted individual, even when a woman's actions are so significant that they cannot be ignored. The language the chroniclers use to describe her often reveals their biases. This brings us back to a debate we have touched on before, but it is a crucial one for understanding the historical record. When a chronicler praises a woman for her successful defense of a castle, how should we interpret that praise? Historians still argue about whether this language celebrated female strength or subtly reinforced traditional gender norms. When a writer praises a woman like Black Agnes of Dunbar by saying she had the heart of a man, is he truly complimenting her? On one level, yes, but on a deeper level, he is revealing the limits of his own worldview. He can only understand her competence and courage by framing them as masculine qualities. Her success is presented as an exception to her gender, a moment where she transcended her womanly nature and acted like a man. This phrasing subtly reinforces the idea that courage, leadership, and martial prowess are inherently male attributes. The chronicler is simultaneously praising the individual woman and reinforcing the patriarchal structure she is operating within. So, if the official histories are a biased and incomplete source, how do modern historians rediscover these lost stories? They have to become historical detectives, looking for clues in unconventional places and reading between the lines of the texts we do have. A modern historian might read that same chronicle that dismisses the camp followers as a nuisance who slowed the army down, but instead of taking that at face value, they see it as concrete proof that a massive civilian contingent, including many women, was present and so essential that the army could not get rid of them. The complaint itself becomes the evidence. But the most exciting work comes from looking beyond the chronicles to a whole host of other documents that were never intended to be histories at all. This is where the quirky, hidden details of women's lives are found. A historian might spend months looking through the dry, dense household account books of a noble estate. And there, buried in a long list of expenditures, they might find a payment recorded to an unnamed woman for carrying letters to my lord at the siege of Calais. And suddenly, a secret mission, an act of espionage like the one we imagined, is revealed not in a grand narrative, but in a simple financial entry. A castle's supply ledger might show a sudden, massive purchase of grain and salted meat, and the notation reveals that it was authorized by my lady while the lord was away, providing proof of her administrative and logistical role. Legal records are another absolute treasure trove. A woman might appear in a court case over a property dispute, and her testimony might reveal the details of how she managed her husband's estate after he died in the war. A will or testament can show us what property a woman owned in her own right and how she chose to distribute it, giving us an insight into her economic life and personal relationships. And then there is the physical evidence uncovered by archaeology. The analysis of skeletons found in a mass grave from a battle or a siege can tell us about the presence of women and children among the casualties, revealing that the front line was not as exclusively male as we might think. The discovery of everyday artifacts in the excavation of a military campsite, things like sewing needles, spindles, or certain types of domestic pottery, can paint a vivid picture of the daily work that the women of the camp were performing. Through this painstaking detective work, a new, richer history emerges. You will rarely find the full, detailed biography of a common laundress or a female spy. Instead, you find fragments. A name in a list, a payment in an account book, a mention in a court case, a piece of a clay pot found in the dirt. And the job of the modern historian is to carefully piece together these tiny, scattered clues to reconstruct a life, to tell a story that the great chroniclers of the past never thought to tell. And why does this matter? Why is it so important to find these lost stories? It is not about trying to pretend that every woman in the Middle Ages was a secret warrior princess, or a forgotten general like Joan of Arc. It is about something far more profound. It is about understanding that war, like all great historical events, was not an exclusively male activity that happened in a vacuum. It was an event that impacted, shook, and involved the entire society, men and women alike. By uncovering these stories, we restore the other half of the population to the narrative. We see that while the men were fighting with swords and lances, the women were fighting their own battles. The battle for hygiene and morale in the camp. The battle against disease and infection. The battle to defend the home. The battle to hold a family and an estate together in the face of loss. These were different battles, fought with different weapons, but they were no less essential to the story of war. When we include these stories, our picture of the past becomes richer, more complex, and ultimately more truthful. We are not just adding women to the story, we are changing the shape of the story itself. And with this quiet act of recovery, of finding the lost, and finally listening to the silenced, our long journey into the hidden world of medieval women at war comes to its end. We have walked through the muddy, chaotic camp and stood on the wind-swept battlements of a besieged castle. We have felt the quiet courage of the spy in the darkness and the heavy burden of the widow at dawn. The great, tumultuous story of medieval warfare, with all its sound and fury, can now begin to recede, its sharp edges softening into the gentle quiet of your own room. Let the images of battle and siege fade from your mind. The clash of steel, the roar of the trebuchet, the shouts of command, let them all dissolve into the stillness that surrounds you. Replace them instead with the quiet, enduring images of the women we have met, the rhythmic work of hands washing linen in a cold stream, the focused calm of a healer grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle, the determined gaze of a lady looking out over her lands, the silent prayer of a mother for her family's safety. These are the images of a different kind of strength, a resilience that is not found in armor and swords, but in the steadfast endurance of the human spirit. Feel the profound peace and safety of your own bed, in your own quiet room. The world you have just visited was one of constant precarity, a world where survival was a daily struggle against violence, disease, and loss. But that world is far away now. You are safe. The walls around you are not under siege. The night is calm. There are no alarms to be answered, no wounds to be tended, no desperate messages to be sent. There is only the simple welcome and profound peace of the present moment. Let your thoughts of the past dissolve like mist. The stories have all been told. The long-forgotten women have been remembered. Their strength and their suffering have been honored. Their quiet contributions to the great noisy drama of history have been acknowledged. There is nothing more to be done, nothing more to analyze. The great tapestry of their lives can now be allowed to rest. And as it rests, you can allow yourself to rest too. Let your mind become as still as a quiet hearth after the fire has died down to embers. Let your body feel the gentle, heavy pull of sleep. Think of the quiet, patient work of a needle and thread, mending a tear, making something whole again. Let that same quiet, restorative work begin now on your own tired mind. Let sleep mend the scattered thoughts of the day, stitching them into the soft, seamless fabric of your dreams. Let the battles fade. Let the struggles cease. Let the quiet be your comfort. Sweet dreams.